In the year 97 of the Common Era, a Roman bureaucrat named Sextus Julius Frontinus sat down to write a report about water. He was the curator aquarum, the water commissioner of the city of Rome, and he was proud of his job. He catalogued every aqueduct, every pipe diameter, every licensed connection. He described a system that delivered roughly 1 million cubic meters of fresh mountain water into the city every day, feeding fountains, bathhouses, private homes, and the imperial palaces on the Palatine Hill. It was, by any measure, one of the great engineering achievements of the ancient world. Frontinus wrote about it the way a man writes about something he loves. He never once mentioned that the pipes were made of lead. Not because he did not know. The Latin word for lead is plumbum. The men who worked those pipes were called plumbari. The word that English inherited for the entire science of moving water through buildings, plumbing, is at its root a word that means lead working. Frontinus knew what the pipes were made of. He simply did not consider it a problem worth recording. And here is the thing that should keep you awake tonight. He was mostly right. The pipes were not the main danger. The real poison was somewhere else entirely. In places so intimate, so daily, so woven into the fabric of Roman life that no one connected the symptoms to the cause for 400 years. Not because Romans were stupid, because the poison tasted sweet. Rome, at its peak, governed somewhere between 55 and 70 million people spread across 3 continents. That is roughly 1/5 of every human being alive on Earth at the time. These people lived inside a material culture of staggering sophistication. Running water, heated floors, concrete that cured underwater, a road network stretching 80,000 kilometers twice around the planet at the equator. They had lawyers, engineers, surgeons, poets, industrial mining operations, a postal service, and an agricultural system that fed a city of 1 million without refrigeration. They also had no sugar. This is where the story turns. If you understand nothing else about Roman toxicology, understand this. The absence of sugar created a demand for sweetness, and Rome answered that demand with lead. The process was simple. You took unfermented grape juice, fresh must, straight from the press, and you boiled it down. Reduce it by half, and you had defrutum. Reduce it by 2/3, and you had sapa, a thick, dark syrup with an intensely sweet taste. Columella, writing his agricultural manual around 65 of the Common Era, gave precise instructions. He specified that the must should be boiled in lead vessels, not copper, because copper gave the syrup an unpleasant metallic flavor. He was right about the flavor. Copper does taste bitter. Lead does not. When organic acids in grape juice react with lead metal at high temperature, they produce a compound called lead acetate. Its historical name tells you everything. Sugar of lead. It is genuinely, pleasantly sweet. And it is a cumulative neurotoxin that the human body cannot efficiently excrete. Romans stirred sapa into their wine. They cooked with it. They preserved fruit in it. They added it to sauces. The cookbook attributed to Apicius, compiled in the 4th or 5th century, but drawing on centuries of earlier recipes, calls for defrutum repeatedly. Wine was the universal Roman beverage. Water was unreliable. Beer was what barbarians drank. So Romans drank wine at every meal, diluted with water as civilized people did. And that wine, across virtually all social classes, was sweetened and preserved with a lead compound that no modern regulatory body on Earth would permit at any detectable level. Jerome Nuriagu, a geochemist who published the landmark study Lead and Lead Poisoning in Antiquity in 1983, estimated that a Roman aristocrat consuming a liter of sapa-sweetened wine per day and a liter was not unusual at a Roman dinner, could ingest up to 20 milligrams of lead daily. That estimate has been debated. John Scarborough, writing in the Journal of the History of Medicine the following year, argued Nriagu's calculations relied on worst-case assumptions. The actual number may have been lower, but even conservative estimates place chronic Roman lead intake at levels that modern toxicology classifies as clinically significant. The wine was not the only vector. It was merely the largest. Picture a Roman woman in the 1st century. She is urban, she has some means, and she is preparing her face for the day. The foundation she applies is cerussa, white lead carbonate, a thick paste mixed with animal fat or beeswax, smoothed across the skin of her face, her neck, her arms. The white complexion it produces is the Roman beauty standard. Pliny the Elder described the manufacturing process. Lead strips suspended over vinegar in sealed ceramic pots, the fumes slowly converting the metal surface to a white powder that was scraped off, ground, and sold. He also noted, almost as an aside, that the substance was harmful. Then he continued listing its medical applications. This was not occasional use. Literary and material evidence points to daily application among urban women of means. Every morning, a layer of lead carbonate pressed against the skin. Dermal absorption is slower than ingestion, but it is cumulative. The symptoms, fatigue, pallor, irritability, abdominal pain, would have been invisible against a backdrop of 100 other possible causes in a world without blood tests. And the pallor the lead itself produced was masked by the very cosmetic that was causing it. You are beginning to see the pattern. The sweetener in the wine, the foundation on the face, the vessel the food was cooked in. Lead-glazed pottery was standard across Roman kitchens. Pewter, a lead-tin alloy, made up the mess kits that soldiers ate from in every legion camp from Britain to Syria. Garum, the fermented fish sauce that Romans poured on virtually everything, the way you might use ketchup, was frequently stored in lead-lined containers. Acidic foods leached the metal. Every meal was a small dose. Every day, the body accumulated what it could not shed. And then there were the pipes. The famous pipes, the ones everyone thinks they know about. Here is where the story inverts. In 2014, a team led by Hugo de Lilla published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences analyzing sediment cores from the Tiber and from Rome's ancient harbor at Portus. They found that tap water in ancient Rome contained roughly 100 times more lead than local spring water. That sounds devastating. But the same study concluded that this level was likely below the threshold for acute clinical poisoning in most cases. The reason? Calcium carbonate. The mineral-rich water flowing through Roman aqueducts deposited a layer of calcium scale inside the lead pipes over time, creating a natural barrier between the water and the metal. The longer a pipe had been in service, the thicker the barrier. The pipes were not innocent, but they were not the main killer. The main killer was on the dinner table and the dressing table, in the wine cup and the cosmetics dish, in the sweetener stirred into a child's porridge and the glaze on the bowl that held it. Now, here is the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. Romans knew. Not all of them, not systematically, but the knowledge was there, written down, available to anyone who read the right books. In approximately 25 BCE, the architect Vitruvius, the same man whose writings on proportion would inspire Leonardo da Vinci 15 centuries later, wrote this in his treatise on architecture. Water conducted through earthen pipes is more wholesome than that through lead. Indeed, that conveyed in lead must be injurious, because from it white lead is obtained, and this is said to be injurious to the human system. This may be verified by observing the workers in lead, who are of a pallid color. He saw the pallor. He connected it to the material. He recommended terracotta pipes instead. That was 2,000 years before modern toxicology existed. And nothing changed. The lead pipes stayed. The sapa kept boiling. The sarusa kept selling. This is not ancient stupidity. This is something more familiar and more disturbing. It is the gap between knowing a thing and doing something about it. Consider, modern researchers established the link between cigarette smoke and lung cancer in the early 1950s. Meaningful legislation restricting tobacco took another 40 years to arrive. Leaded gasoline was standard in American cars until the 1970s and was not fully phased out in many countries until the 1990s. The pattern is not Roman. The pattern is human. We identify the poison. We describe its effects. And then we keep stirring it into our wine because the wine tastes better that way, and the people selling the wine have no interest in changing the recipe. If the lead in the wine was the invisible catastrophe, the lead on the bedroom walls was its quiet accomplice. Walk into any excavated house in Pompeii, and you will see it immediately. The colors. Reds so vivid they look almost wet. Yellows sharp enough to sting. Those reds are cinnabar, mercuric sulfide. Those yellows are orpiment, arsenic trisulfide. Romans painted these pigments across every wall of rooms that measured perhaps 3 meters by 4, often with small windows or none at all. They slept in these rooms. Their children crawled across floors beneath these walls. Where paint flaked, exposure followed. Vitruvius himself warned that minium, red lead, another common pigment, darkened in enclosed spaces. He was watching chemical degradation happen without understanding what it meant for the people breathing in those rooms every night. Mercury, too, found its way into Roman bodies through medicine. The physician Dioscorides, writing in the 1st century, recommended mercury compounds for skin conditions. Pliny recorded that slaves assigned to cinnabar mines were understood to be receiving a death sentence. The knowledge was specific, was documented, was ignored at scale. Mercury in Roman medicine was real, but should not be overstated. It became far more prominent in later centuries, particularly when early modern physicians began prescribing it for syphilis. In Rome, it was part of the pharmacopoeia, but not a daily exposure vector on the scale of lead. There is one more detail. It is quiet and it is devastating. Soranus of Ephesus, a physician practicing in the early 2nd century, compiled a gynecological manual that was the most sophisticated of its kind in the ancient world. Among his recommendations for contraception, he listed the application of sarusa, white lead, as a cervical pessary, lead as birth control. The irony is almost too precise. Lead is indeed a reproductive toxin. It causes reduced fertility, miscarriage, stillbirth, but not through any barrier mechanism, through systemic poisoning of the mother's body. A Roman doctor prescribed the right outcome for the wrong reason, and neither he nor his patients ever knew that the prescription was destroying their capacity for healthy pregnancy through a pathway he could not have imagined. The dead can testify if you know how to read them. Modern analysis of Roman-era skeletal remains from sites across the empire, London, Herculaneum, various Italian cemeteries, consistently shows lead concentrations in bone averaging 10 to 30 times higher than pre-industrial baselines. The bones do not lie. They cannot be biased like Suetonius. They cannot exaggerate like Pliny. They simply record what the body absorbed over a lifetime, locked into the mineral matrix of the skeleton, waiting for a mass spectrometer to read them 2,000 years later. And the exposure was not equal. This is perhaps the cruelest irony in the entire story. Wealthy Romans had private water piped directly into their homes, a privilege requiring a formal license from the water commissioner specifying your pipe's diameter. Poorer Romans collected water from public fountains, where it had traveled through longer stretches of stone and terracotta channel before reaching the lead distribution pipes. Wealthy Romans drank finer, more heavily sweetened wine. Wealthy Romans wore more cosmetics. Wealthy Romans ate from better tableware with better glazes that leached more efficiently. Lead poisoning in Rome may have been, in part, a disease of affluence. The richer you were, the more poison you could afford. Did it matter? Did this slow, invisible accumulation of a neurotoxin in the bodies of millions actually change anything about how Rome functioned or how it ended? This is where honesty requires care. Nriagu argued in 1983 that chronic lead poisoning among the Roman elite contributed to declining birth rates, impaired decision-making, and institutional decay. The thesis made headlines. It is neat, it is dramatic, and it is almost certainly too simple. Scarborough and other scholars pointed out that Rome functioned, often brilliantly, for centuries under constant lead exposure. Monocausal explanations for Rome's transformation are rejected by virtually every serious historian working today. Lead was one stressor among many. Plague, climate shifts, military overextension, economic instability, the sheer institutional fatigue of governing an empire across 3 continents for half a millennium. What the evidence supports, without overreach, is this. Romans lived in a cloud of chronic, low-level toxic exposure that modern medicine recognizes as harmful to cognition, fertility, child development, and cardiovascular health. They documented the symptoms. Celsus and Galen describe abdominal complaints, gout, cognitive decline, infertility, without ever connecting them to the element that permeated their material world. The medical term for chronic lead poisoning is Saturnism, named after Saturn, which is the planet the Romans associated with lead. Even the word carries Rome inside it. When scientists drill ice cores from the Greenland ice sheet, they find something remarkable. There is a layer of elevated lead corresponding precisely to the centuries of Roman mining and smelting. Lead from Spanish and British and Balkan mines, carried by wind across the entire northern hemisphere, deposited in Arctic snow, and preserved as a chemical signature that is legible today. The atmospheric lead pollution of the Roman Empire was 4 times higher than natural background levels. That spike does not appear again until the Industrial Revolution, more than 1,000 years later. A pre-industrial civilization left a detectable scar in the planetary record. You can measure Rome in ice. If you are wondering what the modern parallel is, you already know. It is not a single substance. It is the pattern. The substance that is everywhere, that makes life more convenient, that shows up in every household, that produces health effects we are only beginning to measure, and that we will keep using until the evidence becomes impossible to ignore, and the politics align with the science, which always takes longer than the science alone. For the Romans, it was lead. Sweet, useful, versatile, in the pipes and the wine and the makeup and the medicine and the paint and the cookware and the mess kits and the contraceptives. An element so woven into daily life that removing it would have meant dismantling the material culture of the most powerful civilization on Earth. They never removed it. They described its effects, warned about its workers, prescribed it as medicine, stirred it into their children's food, and painted it on their bedroom walls. And the empire, for reasons no single explanation can capture, slowly, unevenly, over centuries, came apart. The bones remain. In museum storage rooms and university labs across Europe, Roman skeletons lie in labeled drawers, their lead content catalogued and published in peer-reviewed journals. They cannot tell us whether the lead changed history, but they can tell us with chemical certainty that it was there, in every body, in every class, in every province, for centuries. The next time you turn on a faucet and the water runs clear through copper pipe, you are standing at the end of a lesson that took 2,000 years to learn. And if you are honest, you will admit that you do not yet know what you are standing at the beginning of. The Romans did not know either. Nobody does, while the sweetener still tastes good. If this is the kind of history that changes how you see the ordinary things around you, there is more ahead. The Roman machine had 100 systems like this one. Brilliant, lethal, still half visible in the world you walk through every day. Subscribe, and we will keep reading the record together.